when the 5-star characters aren't coming home, well, you still have the 4-star characters to fall back on, and they will be there for you. So today I'm going to be taking a look at all of the 4-star characters in the game and basically giving you a quick overlook right here in something that looks a little bit like a tier list, where I'm going to place every single character not based on just how powerful they are. This is not a power tier list. This is basically going to mostly be a tier list on how often you're going to make great use of these characters, and generally how often will you want to have these characters on your team in different types of content. So we're going to have two special tiers at the top, with one being the 5-star in the skies, the next one just being for characters you want to use on Nightmare specific strategies. There are some specific strategies where you kind of need to have a specific 4-star, so looking ahead for Nightmare mode strategies, you may want to have one of these in your party. And then the other 3 tiers are just for how good do I think they actually are generally in most content. So you're going to start right here with our very first one in the list, which just happens to be the Yuma. So Yuma is one of the 2 4-star healers that you will have access to, with very simple ascensions that just increase HP recovery amount a little bit more, and also increase the amount of MP you're going to be getting, which at A4 is actually kind of important because it allows you to get to your special attack usually a turn faster than most of the time. And the skills are very simple. You just have a simple 3-person heal that also removes ailments. You have a simple passive that simply makes you heal more on targets that are low HP. A simple support ability that, when equipped to a healer, increases HP recovery amounts. Are very, very simple stuff. And of course, the special attack is also very simple. It just heals everyone on the team. So with a character that looks as simple as this, probably something decent, maybe generally great, somewhere between here. But turns out this is actually already our first Nightmare strategy unit, simply because, for one simple reason, there is at least one boss in Nightmare known as the Birdcage, which probably right now is the hardest boss in the game, maybe the second hardest after Needle Witch. Is probably either of these 2 on Nightmare, like based on your party strength, where the boss uses a lot of ailments to try and activate its own mechanics, because it has special mechanics based on if you have ailments on you or not. So in order to counter those mechanics, you need someone that can get rid of ailments. And this right here is the most ready way that you're going to be having of getting rid of ailments, which means that most people that beat the Birdcage Witch on Nightmare will have to use a Yuma, which is also the reason why I actually kind of built her. Because outside of that, people argue that, oh yeah, she's pretty decent, she's maybe something around here. Personally, I don't think her healing output is good enough to put her in there. Like, if it wasn't for Nightmare strategies, for me personally, I'd probably put her in here, and we're gonna look at how the other healer compares to this. But the fact that she gets rid of ailments makes her definitely one for the Nightmare strategies category. So if you want to have at least one of the 2 healers to raise up, you might want to invest your limited resources into that one. But keep in mind, there are other ways of maybe getting around the Birdcage Witch, and we might see another way of getting around ailments later on as well, just in not so easy ways. Moving on with the next character, we have the Kush. So Kush is a character who is one of the attackers that we're going to be taking a look at today. And generally, I will already tell you right now that attackers are not going to be put very highly on this list, because for the most part, how strong exactly your attacker is not going to make that big of a difference most of the time. If you have a team that can hold on and keep going toe-to-toe with a boss and with a group, it won't matter that much how quickly the enemies actually die once they get put in break. And all of these attackers we're going to take a look at today will be doing a good job at killing enemies that are in break. Some maybe a little bit better than others, but for the most part, they're all going to be able to do their job. We're going to start specifically with Kush, who also has rather simple. We're going to see a lot of very similar ascension effects, by the way. This one, usually most of them have at battle start effect. In this case, at battle start, increase MP by 25% to get their special out faster. And we're already going to be seeing something with buff stacks and enemy break advances action order. A lot of 4-star characters also have this, where I think it's specifically maybe either the breakers or the attackers that also have a lot of action advance on break for their ascension effects. They're very simple things, but specifically the first and second one are actually kind of interesting. Now, why would you want to get a fast special? Is because the special advances your own action order. So, which means that when you get a special, you can hit that special and her next attack, her next turn will come much faster. Her skill is a very simple AoE skill. Her special is also AoE, which means she already is showing to be a very AoE focused character, which deals also bonus damage to enemies in break. And especially when we now look at the passive, we'll see what she's actually all about. Turn star for each enemy in break increases attack by 2%. By the way, these skills are not fully leveled, so I'm going to reading off at the current level. You can see the current level at the top right here. But if you want to check these levels out, check these abilities out at level 10, you can go in here and swap to level 10, and you can see what it does at a level 10. But yes, it gives you bonus attack for each enemy in break every turn you have on her, as well as gaining some action advance, like additional action advance to her ascension, and even some MP when enemies hit break. So you can see that her game plan is all about having a group of enemies, not specifically one boss, but like a group of enemies that get put in break, and as soon as they get put in break, she action advances, she gets MP, she stacks herself some buff, and then she starts throwing one special attack out after another and just keeps spamming special attacks and more abilities and more special attacks and more battle skills, specifically against groups of broken enemies. And that is something that she's going to be incredibly good at, but how often do you actually see that in going through the game, going through Nightmare mode, for example? Turns out there are actually some nodes where having AoE against a lot of enemies is going to be very effective. That said, as I said earlier, for the most part, most of your attackers are going to be doing a similar job here. So, I mean, you have an attacker that is not going to be good against the bosses, and the bosses are usually the harder nodes, but there are also going to be some hard nodes against multiple enemies. Overall, I would say I'm going to put her in a decent tier for now, but she is probably one of the most powerful 4-star attackers out there, so you can probably put her also in generally great, but for now I'm going to put her in decent. Next up, we have the American Weeb. We have Ashley. So she's a breaker who focuses specifically on AoE, and we're going to be seeing that she's not the only breaker who does that. She has a very simple special, just deals damage to all enemies. She increases her own speed by doing that, which is very important for breakers. I'm going to say this right now, speed is probably the most important part of a breaker, because the more often you attack, the more break damage you can do, since break damage usually doesn't scale with any of your stats. Okay, so speed is the one thing that scales your break damage. Next up, the skill simply deals damage to all enemies and increases your own break bonus. So here's the thing about break bonus. It does not mean that you do more break damage. That is not what that is. I know a lot of people have kind of thought that's what it does, but it's not that. At least according to what the in-game help says and to what people have been testing, unless somehow we've all been still wrong about this, it seems like break bonus instead makes it so when an enemy is broken and you then attack them again, the break bonus decides how much more percentage the break modifier racks on. So if this character attacks, the enemy gets an increased break modifier when they're in break, and how much the break modifier goes up, that's the break bonus. So this makes enemies get a higher break bonus percentage when they get broken. That's what that is for. And then the ability is a very simple chase, where if an enemy gets broken, she just does an AoE attack, and since she's very much about AoE and you're fighting against multiple enemies, what can happen is that you break one enemy and then the follow-up happens and another enemy gets broken, but that is not going to trigger another follow-up attack, since you can only get one follow-up attack per any character's turn. So you will have to wait until someone else gets a turn in order for there to be another follow-up attack afterwards. But this can still lead to multiple breaks happening very quickly, and then when multiple breaks have happened, the battle skill makes sure to rack up the percentage on all of the enemies all at once. And with the special also coming in, you can then keep pumping those turns out, keep getting the break bonus up, and the Ascensions on top of that makes you a little bit faster, even more break bonus, and also even more action advance for even more turns. And if you look at her speed, we can also tell she's extremely fast. All of that makes it look like, yeah, she is kind of really, really fast and really powerful, right? And that is indeed the case. That said, how often do you need an AoE breaker? Do you need it a lot, or do you need it not so often? And this is actually kind of the answer that I'm going to give you right now, is that I think that AoE breaks, they are important whenever there is an AoE stage, of course, but like I said earlier, most of the really tough stages that you're going to be facing are boss fights. And in boss fights, most of the time, you're only fighting a single boss, and when you have an ad, either it's an ad you have to ignore, in which case you're still doing single target damage, or it's an ad you have to focus down, in which case you're still doing single target damage. So AoE breakers are not quite as important. Now, if there's another piece of content, let's say for example, a new endgame mode comes out and it's multiple enemies at once all the time, then you would absolutely bump her up to the next tier. But as it currently stands, with the main story, with battle mode, with nightmare mode, with what is actually difficult on these nodes, I'm going to have to say she might not be actually that useful right now, but keep that in mind. She's one of the candidates to be moved up to the next tier when more AoE focused content comes out. Next up, we have Rico. So Rico is our first buffer that we're going to be taking a look at. She has many aura buffs, or like AoE buffs, to the entire team. When I say aura buff, I usually mean a buff that is active for just existing. Like if she just exists, but people around her are going to be buffed. I'm going to get to that in a second, but for special attack, since it's already on screen right now, it just buffs everyone's damage as well as critical damage. It does so specifically to enemies in break, which is kind of interesting, but I will tell you right now that usually when you have a buffer on the team, you want that buffer to use their buffs when the enemy is about to or has just entered break, because that's when your attacker will actually need buffs. Like, you don't need to buff your character's damage when the enemy is not in break, because you're not going to be doing much damage when the enemy is not in break. So the fact that there's only critical damage to enemies in break doesn't actually make much of a difference at all, because that's when you're going to be buffing anyway. The skill is another skill that buffs everyone. In this case, it's crit rate. We can already see, oh, she buffs crit rate, and then you get increased crit damage to enemies, and then it also just does a general damage up. So we have a mixture of buffs already that are mostly around crits. Awesome. And here's the aura that I was talking about. The ability increases all allies attack by a bunch of percent just for existing, right? Just for existing. And it also, all of these of course increase when you go up in levels. So this one at max level is actually 16%. And when anyone crits, I think it's when anyone crits, it might also be only if she crits, increases all ally speed by 2%, 2 turns, stacks 5 times. Awesome. Yeah, I think this is when anyone crits, because otherwise you're not going to be able to max this out. But yeah, as you can see, very simple but very powerful support actually. Buffs attack, buffs damage up, buffs crit rate, buffs crit damage, gives you a whole load of different buffs, some of which exist but just by existing, and then when you actually make use of those crits, you get speed on top of that, which was the one thing she wasn't buffing. There it is. So she is a very good all-rounder buffer. I wasn't talking about the support abilities with the other ones, by the way. This one is HP, some of these are not that interesting. This one is decreases damage taken. This one is attack, which actually is something I'm using right now. Most of these are very simple, so I'm not really going to be mentioning them that much. But yeah, very simple support, but does very many different good things. And I think the Ascensions are also quite good at Battle Start, Advanced Action Order. This is actually kind of important for buffers if you want to immediately deal burst damage to the enemy, like on lower level enemies or enemies that don't need to be broken for you to deal a lot of damage to them. You can use this to immediately get buffs out and immediately start bursting. Then just another aura effect, passive 10% crit rate. That is kind of insane. This is one of the best Ascensions on low rarity characters that exist. And then another effect that buffs everyone on break, all as 12%. Awesome. She just has to exist. Like, even if she's not using her skill and is just using normal attacks, just by existing, she's buffing the entire party by a lot. When breaks happen, when crits happen, the buffs increase. And when she gets to special, there's even more buffs. She's just overall an absolutely great character. Absolutely great. I'm going to be putting her as the first in this tier right now. We're going to be seeing that generally buffers, 4-star buffers, are actually doing a pretty good job at what they're supposed to do. 4-star buffers generally quite good. Moving on with the next one. Hey, it's another 4-star buffer. Is she also going to be in that tier? Yes, she is, by the way. She's also going to be here. Why? Let's take a look. So her special gives all allies speed, and this is flat speed, which is actually kind of important because when you have percentage speed buffs, they go on top of the flat speed. At least it should be that way. So if you have only someone who buffs percentage speed, let's say someone is really slow. Well, on a slow character, percentage speed buffs not very effective, but flat speed buffs might be a lot more effective on characters that have low base speed. So it's really good to have someone who can also buff that. And if we take a look at the level 10 for this, it goes all the way up to 25, which is kind of a lot. So there's actually a lot of speed to get from that. It also grants 3 magic, but we get to see what magic does in a second. We also have the battle skill here, which increases a single ally's MP by 20%. So it's not 20, it's 20%, by the way. So however much MP they have at a maximum, this is 20% of that, because different characters can have different MP amounts that they require to use their special skill. On top of that, it also buffs them by 30%, which is actually quite a lot. And of course, this also increases up. The MP percentage doesn't increase by a lot, because MP is pretty important in this game. So the developers don't want to put too many effects in the game that give you too much MP. But yeah, attack also 40%. Really nice numbers, but you see they don't actually go up by that much per skill level, which makes it also very effective at low skill levels. The basic attack, should be mentioned, also grants 1 magic. And what does magic actually do? We'll see what it does right here. First off, on basic attack, she just increases her own speed by 12%, which just means that if you have a buffer like this, where sometimes you don't have enough skill points to use your special skill, or you just are in a situation where you don't need to use your skill, you can then just use your normal attacks to generate skill points and pass a turn. But doing so will actually make your next turn come a little bit faster, so you get something for having to auto attack. But now to actually get to the magic system, you start the battle with 1 magic, and if you reach 5 magic, what happens is you consume those 5 magic stacks, and you make your skill stronger. This is a very interesting magic effect, where it's not like a lot of other characters have magic effects where once they reach 5 magic, they do a follow-up attack, for example, right? But this is actually an assist effect, where she increases her own skill. So this skill right here, it gives MP and attack. Well, if you get to 5 magic, then that skill on top of that also gives the person who uses on a buff that, as it says right here, increases damage dealt by special attacks by 20% to that other character you're buffing with this. So you're buffing your own skill to make the skill stronger and give stronger buffs. So that's really interesting. In support ability is kind of useless. So, taking a look at the quick ascensions, we have similar ascensions as other characters. As you can see right here, it's actually kind of the exact same ascension as other characters, not actually that strong. But just the fact that she's able to just give someone MP. So if you have someone who has a really strong Kyoku special attack, you can just keep pumping MP into them. Let's say, for example, you use this on your attacker. You want your attacker to burst the enemy down. You can keep pumping into them. They also gain attack up because of that. And it also, since you're giving them MP to get to their special attack faster, with the magic system, you're also then increasing the damage they deal with that special attack. So she's able to hypercharge other people's special attacks. And that is just so powerful that she's definitely a generally great character. Moving on, we have another attacker right here. This is a very simple attacker right here. Masada, she just deals single target damage. Her skill also just deals single target damage and gives herself a damage buff. And her ability is just that if she attacks someone who has a high break bonus, which is most enemies that aren't like normal enemies, because normal enemies like little critters might not go to 200% break bonus, but at least bosses and stronger enemies like that, they're going to go to 200% or higher on the break bonus. So once they're broken, you're just going to be continuously throwing out follow-up attacks, all single target, of course. The support ability is actually kind of interesting, because it's one of the few 4-star support abilities that actually do something interesting. In this case, increases the damage dealt to an effective element by a bunch of percentage. So this is actually one of the few ones that you might actually want to use even on a 5-star characters, while as we've seen so far, all of the other ones, all the other support abilities we've seen so far, maybe not that interesting. But yeah, very, very simple stuff right here. The ascension effects right here, Battlestar increases MP, not very interesting, but this one actually increases your follow-up attack damage. You're going to be throwing out a lot of follow-up attack damage, so this will actually make a follow-up hit considerably harder. And the enemy break, increasing action auto, also not very interesting. So we can see, yeah, she's kind of very straightforward, very simple, but just being able to do a whole bunch of single target damage, that's kind of what an attacker needs to do on like a tough boss fights, right? Like on tough boss fights, once the enemy is broken, you need your attacker to be able to burst the enemy down as fast as possible. And she's someone who can just do that because she just has good single target damage. She doesn't really do anything else. It's like literally the only thing she does, but she does her job. That said, like I said, most attackers can sort of do the same thing as each other, so I'm going to be putting her right here. If you want to list between tiers, we can also do it like this. So yeah, as far as single target attacker goes, she does her job, but other attackers can also do her job. So if we're talking specifically, do you need Masada over other characters, like other attackers? The answer to that is kind of no. Now, you don't need specifically Masada if you also have another 4-star attacker who does the job. This is why I'm putting her here. Next up, we have Ayame. Ooh. So Ayame is a very interesting character. She's a debuffer. I think the first one we're looking at today. She's going to go in a very special tier. And what we can see right here, she has a special effect on her special attack. Everything's so special right now. What is happening? She removes buffs from a single enemy. And this right there alone puts her in Nightmare Strategies tier. Because you will see that there is 2 or 3 or some more nightmare bosses that give themselves some really powerful buffs. And it would be really sad if those bosses use those powerful buffs against you. Now, this doesn't work on all bosses that buff themselves, like, because on some bosses, the buff are part of like an innate passive effect. For example, Octavia. Octavia's stacking buff is an innate passive. You cannot get rid of those buffs. But there are still other bosses that use other buffs that can be cleansed, that can be extremely important to get rid of, or otherwise the boss is going to kill you or do some other bad stuff to you. So already we know what tier is going in, but what else can we take a look at? Well, she also increases the target's damage taken, which is just generally nice to have on a character. So already she's actually, even outside of the buff removal, she's also just good by being able to do this and help out your other 5-star characters. If you have like a 5-star attacker or a 4-star attacker, doesn't matter, they get a lot of help from this. Her skill also is just really good, increases enemy defense, nice, makes sure those attackers hit even harder, awesome, and it makes her get to her Kyoko even faster than most other characters since she grants bonus MP to herself. Great stuff. She's just straightforward and does good stuff. And her ability increases debuff hit rate. Now, debuff is not ailment. I need to make that short. Ailment is stuff that is actually marked as ailment, which is stuff like bleed, poison, curse, burn, those sort of things. While debuff are things that reduce enemy stats, like reduce defense or increase damage taken. Those kinds of effects are debuffs, and it is possible for some enemies to resist some of those debuffs if they have resistance, specifically resistance against debuffs, which some enemies have. But with this ability, you make sure that you still hit your debuffs. And also on special attack, which is your like a Kyoko special attack, increases speed by 10. Sure, like nice stuff. Once again, these are all the base rates. As you can see, the debuff hit rate actually goes up by quite a lot to 40% at the top and 20 speed. So really nice effects. Overall, it's just a very solid character. Very solid character. The support ability speed, 5% speed, also really nice. Look at the ascension. What do we have? Really simple stuff, but then also all ailments and debuffs, well, she doesn't apply ailments, but the debuffs you imply are even more powerful. It's still only 10%, which isn't a lot, but it's still something. Like those numbers that I just told you about the damage increase, the debuff resistance, shred, they're like even more powerful. Awesome. And you can even delay enemies' action. It's only by 10%, which isn't a lot, but just more stuff that makes her just ever so more powerful to help you out on Nightmare, and that's why she goes there. Next up, we have the 5-star. Now, Sasuke, if you've watched the... Like, I've spent 15 minutes, I think, in the beginner's guide video, where at the very end of the video, I spent 15 minutes just showing off a fight with me against Octavia, where I just show off how I'm absolutely destroying Octavia, mostly with Hazuki. Like, yeah, I had some 5-stars in the team, but they didn't actually, like, they weren't as helpful as Hazuki. What does she do? Well, she's Bronya. If you're playing Star Rail, yeah, she's Bronya. That's what she is. First off, though, sure, special attack just deals some damage, increases all allies attack by 18%. Not that important, right? This is at level 4. I've actually given him some levels already, so those numbers are a bit off than what you would be at level 1. And then you have her skill, which is probably the best skill in the game right now. It just gives someone 100% action advance. It also increases damage style. That's not actually that important. The important part is it just gives someone the next turn. And once you look at that, she herself is actually pretty darn fast, which is really good for someone who wants to keep giving her turn to other characters. Awesome. Then you look at that. Oh, when battle starts, she increases her own action order, which just means that she's guaranteed to get the first turn, which means that she can immediately give someone else the first turn before bosses even get to do anything, which that's also pretty darn good. And as long as she's at 50% higher, even more speed. Look at that. That is just what? 25 speed, which should be most of the time, if not all the time, that you have 25 more speed. So you can look at her base speed and like, okay, yeah, so 131 speed. That's pretty darn good. Wait, 25 or was it 15? Or 25, right? Oh my god, it's gonna be 141 speed even. Oh my god, I misread that. Yeah, it's 141 then. She's gonna be so fast, like crazy. Yeah, I haven't fully upgraded her yet. I need to get on that. I need to upgrade her even harder, man. And she also has one of the best support abilities for a 4-star, because she increases speed by a lot. Like She increases speed by faster than other characters who have a similar effect, 12% at maximum. That is insane. So not only are most of her abilities insane, and her battle skill is the best in the game, probably. And then we're not even done. You look at her ascensions, battle start even more action advanced to make sure that she definitely gets immediately the first action as soon as the battle starts and can immediately give someone else the first turn. But of course, giving someone else a turn all the time takes a lot of SP. Well, it's really good that her special attack, like her Kyoko special attack, gives her an SP back. Awesome, that is really good. And she's gonna be using them probably around, like once every 2 turns she's gonna be using a special attack, which puts her from -1 SP negative per turn to I think about -0.5 or something. So she doesn't even need as much SP as some other characters do. Awesome. And the A4 is not that interesting, it's just more attack for everyone. But yeah, just the fact that she can give other characters her turn and she's super fast, and also giving some buffs. Yeah, if you haven't, like, if you're not quite sure, still not quite sure why this is so powerful, and you haven't watched the last 15 minutes of the beginner's guide video, imagine you have a character that's like a 5-star attacker, and that 5-star attacker is really powerful, but they're only getting like 3 turns maybe when the enemy is broken, before the enemy gets out of break. Well, with Hazuki, that character might get like 6 turns, and that sounds broken, and that's because it is. But what if you have a breaker who needs like 3 turns to break or let's say it's more like 5 turns. Let's say you have a breaker that takes like 5 turns to break the enemy boss. That's quite a long time to break that boss. But maybe that 5 can go down to 3 turns if you can just repeatedly give that breaker some turns from Hazuki. And you break the turn 2 turns faster, break the enemy boss 2 turns faster. Sounds broken? It is. Let's say your healer or your defender can't keep up with protecting the party. Man, wouldn't it be great if you could like give them another turn so they can protect the party even harder? Yeah, that's exactly as broken as it does. Like, everything that she does is just make characters suddenly broken. Because every character in this game is like balanced around the fact that they can only do so much in any given amount of time. But Hazuki being able to just give her turn to someone else while she's super fast means that you can just repeatedly give her turn to someone who's really far behind in the action order and just basically give other people a double turn, which is insanely powerful. In Star Rail, there was a 5-star character, like a premium character who did that, called Bronya, and she was known as one of the best characters in the entire game for like over a year, maybe even 2 years. And then someone else came along who basically did the same thing that she does, but a little bit better. And then that character was called broken by everyone. So yeah, it's kind of busted. Doing this is actually kind of busted. And the fact that she's a 4-star is kind of insane. And the fact that she also gets 1 SP back on her special attack, insane. So yeah, she's the only one that's going to be in this tier, by the way. This is absolutely busted. That said, there is one drawback to her, is that she's only this busted if you're playing her on manual. If you play her on auto battle just can't do it. Auto battle just doesn't know what they're supposed to do. So you know, auto battle is just not the place for her. But if you're playing on manual, I don't think there's any character who's more powerful than her. Next up, we have Himika. Oh, very bad character in the Manga Record game, but maybe she's actually good here. Who knows? Let's check it out. Okay, so the special deals some damage to all enemies, also deals extra damage to burning enemies. So we can see, oh, he's a character who's about the burn ailment. Okay, she increases target's damage taken by a little. Okay, not that much. She delays with her skill a single enemy's action order. Huh, that's an interesting effect. You look at that, 20%. And a chance to burn the target. So here's the thing, there is one nightmare boss where you need to apply an ailment, because the boss has like super high stats, but it like specifically says in the innate passive for that boss that if that boss has an ailment on them, they lose most of their stats. And on that boss specifically, Himika is really good. But also outside of that, generally being able to delay enemy turns can be quite important on some nightmare bosses, because some nightmare bosses, they will try to kill you in like a certain amount of time, and they like give themselves a few turns to like set up some really big damage and then try to kill you. But by delaying their turns, you can sort of throw the boss off of their timing and give yourself just enough time to actually break the boss and then kill them. So this can actually be quite helpful in dealing with some of the more powerful nightmare bosses. That said, the other two are definitely probably overall more important on the nightmare strategies than Himika. Himika is more like a side pick, like a not so important pick, but definitely can make some specific nightmare bosses possible for you. But outside of that, she doesn't do anything too special. She just does extra damage to burning enemies and also takes less damage from burning enemies. And yeah, she's just trying to put enemies on fire and then deal bonus damage to them. But the damage doesn't really matter that much. The important part is that she delays turns, and there's one nightmare boss specifically that she wants to burn to get rid of those bonus stats. And the vulnerability increases ailment hit rate, because bosses can of course resist ailments. Specifically, some of the later nightmare bosses also have a lot of resistance to ailments, but this actually helps out with that. And then we look at the Ascension. The first one's nothing special. The second one increases the effects. So this, I think, simply makes it so that the burn does a little bit more damage, and the damage increase from her special attack is also a little bit increased. Nothing too special. But at least, if you look at her A4, there's even more enemy action delay, so that can also help you in a pinch quite a bit. That said, I almost didn't put her here. I almost put her only in here, but there are enough people that have used her on some nightmare bosses that I'm still going to put her in this place, but she barely goes here, okay, just to make sure. Next up, we have Hannah. Oh god, Hannah, you need help, not just mentally, but also in the game. So here's the thing about Hannah. Hannah has a very special mechanic where her special attack will consume all of the damage over time effects on the enemy, like burn, for example, or like poison, or like curse, or any of those, and then immediately deal all the damage that those effects would have dealt during their lifetime. So this is a little bit like detonating damage over time effects in Star Rail, but the difference is, first off, in Star Rail it's only one tick, and then the damage over time effect just still exists on the boss. So you get one bonus tick for once, but here it consumes them entirely and does all of the damage they would have done in their entire lifetime to the enemy immediately, which sounds powerful. And she can also, with her skill, apply a curse to the enemy, which does some damage. Okay, awesome. Even to proximity, which means like AoE, so she also does AoE curse. She even has bonus attack and deals damage, increased damage to cursed enemies. Awesome. But here's the thing. There's like no good damage over time focused characters in the entire game. Like Himika, you play her not for damage, you play Himika not for burn. You play her for all the other stuff. There's Ren, who's a 5-star debuffer who has like a ailment, but that does damage over time, but you're not playing her for that either. There's like no good damage over time character in the game right now, so Hannah, you're missing your character, you're missing your partner. Where's Mikoto? What? There's no one you can play with right now, right? Like she's kind of missing the other characters that are supposed to work alongside her. But without that, she's missing everything. Her Ascension effect at least adds 1 turn duration to the ailments and debuff effects. Ailments is important because that means if the curse lasts an extra turn, that of course means that detonating that curse is going to do 1 extra turn worth of damage. And you can also delay some action order, nice. But yeah, overall, you can't do anything alone. What are you doing here? Next up, we have Kokoro. So Kokoro is our only 4-star defender who on special attack decreases all allies damage taken, which is very simple but is important. Then the battle skill, which doesn't actually start out being that good. So at level 1, the barrier that she applies to all of the allies on your team is very low, but on level 10 is like over 3 times as much. As you can look at that, it goes from 15% plus 65 to 47% plus 405, so it goes up by a lot. So she scales really, really well with investment, making her a lot more powerful at higher levels. And then on top of that, she gives herself extra speed, which she desperately needs, because oh my god, she's slower than a snail. She's slower than Rika was in Mega Record. But at least while she's barriered and if she takes damage against extra MP, she's had a higher chance of being targeted. She's doing her job, okay? She's doing her job. With the extra speed increase at turn 1, she's able to get a really fast barrier out, hopefully before enemies do too much bad stuff to her party. So she puts out the barrier, she gets MP when she gets targeted, which she will often. And then she can use that MP to give everyone a damage taken down buff. Which, yeah, simple stuff, but is exactly what a defender needs to do. And the resurgence effect is actually kind of interesting. So it increases defense by extra 20%, which is a lot. That is actually a lot. And if she takes some enemies from an enemy attack, she then gets even more MP. So yeah, that's a lot of MP that she can gain just by getting hit all the time. Then if it turns out she's not actually fast enough to shield yourself, which even with the 50% you may not be to get faster, because 50% on 85, that still doesn't actually make her that fast. She's still slower than most other characters that get like any amount of speed buffs at all. But at least she starts the battle with a shield buff then too, so that she doesn't immediately get destroyed. And once again, another effect when she takes damage, she just advances her own action order, which means that she can get to shielding herself even faster once it drops off. Nice. And then another really interesting effect, she heals herself when she's low HP, and she also takes less damage when she's under 50% HP. So really simple but very powerful effects that are all stacked on top of each other to make her do her job, and she does her job well, which is why we're going to put her in generally great. You definitely should be looking towards her if you don't have any of the 5-star defenders. She's definitely going to be really nice, but keep in mind that you will need to invest a lot of magic levels into her, because she really needs that battle skill to be leveled up as high as possible for her to be as effective as possible, since she scales really well on having a high magic level. Next up we have Mito. So Mito is another breaker who is AoE focused, similar to Ashley earlier. If we look at the special, it's a blast, or rather proximity type special, where it deals damage to one enemy and then also the 2 adjacent enemies, and increases break gauge depletion. So as I said earlier, with break effect and break bonus is what makes you rack up the break multiplier once an enemy is broken as fast as possible. But break gauge depletion simply makes it so that yes, the break gauge actually does go down more with each attack, and this is what you want right here. This is the good one. So this is the buff that you want to have, and she gives it to herself on her special. That's really good. The skill is simply an AoE attack to all enemies, and we can see what she's all about when you take a look at her ability as well. Increase break effect by 30%. Not that important, but when at least 2 enemies are present, increases break gauge depletion. So once again, she's able to give herself break gauge depletion, but this one only triggers when there's at least 2 enemies. So on a lot of bosses that don't summon ads, or where ads need to die immediately and then they don't exist anymore, this is not going to be active. However, if there's even more than 2 enemies, you get even more break gauge depletion, and her support ability gives even more break effect, not break gauge depletion sadly. But this just means that you specifically want to use her only when there's a lot of enemies, but when there are a lot of enemies, you're going to have a lot of break gauge depletion, you're going to be able to hit all of the enemies, immediately deplete all their bars, and when you do get to Kyoku special attack, you can then buff yourself with even more break gauge depletion to AoE break as much as you can. So she's a big AoE breaker next to Ashley. And if we look at her ascension effects, gives herself more speed, awesome. The speed is 110, which is actually pretty good. Then once again, if there are 2 more targets, more effects for being AoE, she has even more speed, awesome. Every time you use her skill, so it's going to be active basically all the time. There's going to be having 30% extra speed, really fast, and more break effect. And then when she breaks, she also increases action order, awesome. By the way, keep in mind that when it says something like on enemy break, this does not trigger multiple times on the same turn. So if you have one turn, one attack that breaks 5 enemies, for example, you don't get 50% action order advance, you still only get 10%. Keep that in mind. Okay, how good is she then? About here, maybe on the same level as Ashley. So she basically does a similar amount of break as Ashley in similar situation, probably with a higher ceiling, because if you actually do have 5 enemies on the field, she's going to be doing a better job at depleting break gauges. But Ashley also depletes break gauges in AoE situations quite fast while giving some bonuses to the party. Ultimately, there's not going to be that big of a difference between which of these 2 you're going to choose. You can basically pick whoever between these 2 that you personally like more. But like I said, since AoE break situations are not that important right now, but maybe more in the future, right now I would put them here. But once again, if AoE breaking becomes more important in the future, they would probably go up here. That's where I put Mito then. Next up we have Seika. So Seika is kind of interesting because she's a 4-star breaker, but she's actually a single target breaker, as maybe the only one so far. So all the other 4-star breakers are AoE for some reason. So her special just gives us some action advance, and oh, she also has a magic system, haha. Battle skill also single target with magic system. So what does her magic system actually do? Well, first off, she just has 30% extra break effect, not that important, but she starts the battle with 1 magic, and when she reaches 5 magic, she simply does a follow-up attack that deals a basic damage to the enemy. Simple stuff. And the support ability is just extra attacks. So we're already done with her kit. It's extremely simple. She just wants to keep attacking a single enemy, and when she's done enough stuff, then she also gets bonus follow-up attacks for even more break damage to a single enemy. So how good is that actually? Well, first off, we can take a look at her ascensions. She also gives herself extra speed. She grants an additional magic from basic attacks, so you don't always have to use your skill. And if you do use a basic attack, she increases her speed, which makes her a little bit more nice to use when you don't have SP and you can't be spamming your skill all the time. Then you, at least for basic attacks, you're still gaining turns faster and you're still getting magic, so you get something for not using your skill every turn. You can also advance your allies a little bit. Awesome. So yeah, she's extremely simple, but single target breaking is kind of important right now because most of the tough battles in this game are single targets. So I would put her right here, but she's probably on the verge of also going down here to decent. But since single target breaking is kind of important right now, I would still probably put her right here in this tier. But like I said, this can shift depending on what content is actually important to fight. Moving on, we have Rarity, who in my opinion is the better healer between the two. And we're going to take a quick look at her skills right here. So first off, you have her special skill, which just heals all allies a little bit. You definitely, by the way, when it comes to healing, you definitely want to make sure you actually level these up by increasing magic level, because these scale quite well by having more points in here. The battle skill also heals all allies, and this is the important part, heals all allies. With Yuma, a problem you often have is that when enemies use AoE attacks, you can't keep up with the healing. You'll fall behind in healing and someone might just randomly die. But with Rarity healing everyone, you don't have to worry about how the attacks are spread out. You can always make sure to heal everyone, and that's just nice. And on top of that, if you're fighting against multiple enemies, or if you have a boss that summons adds, and you have to kill those adds, and when an enemy is defeated, you get a bonus heal on top of that. And if we take a look at how strong the heal is, 10% plus 120 is actually kind of decent, right? Like the skill, for example, is 9% plus 578, so it's a little bit more, but not by a lot. I think they're going to be somewhat similar, actually. And then support ability is just every recovery rate, only a tiny bit, so not by a lot. But yeah, very simple kit that just heals everyone. And I said something at the beginning of the video when I was talking about Yuma, that we might see someone else who can heal ailments. And it's actually right here. First off, she just increases her own healing amount by quite a bit, actually. So her numbers are actually considerably higher than it might look like. And here we go. And no special attack removes all allies' ailments. Is that enough to also put her on Nightmare strategies? Sadly, no. Sadly, she's still only going in generally great. The reason why is because on that specific boss where you need to cleanse the ailment, you need to cleanse it very early and very often. And only having it on special attack, that's not fast enough and that's not often enough. So sadly, this doesn't quite, is not quite able to counter that specific Nightmare boss, which is the birdcage, by the way. So sadly, she can't quite be used there, but Yuma can, so that's why that is the case. Once again, if that wasn't the case, if that Nightmare boss didn't exist, I'd probably put Yuma either at the very end of this, or maybe somewhere around here, probably Rarity above. But as it stands, it is like this. And then the final ascension, but Passive is just more MP recovery rate, similar thing than what Yuma had, but it's still not enough to get a really fast Kyoko out, sadly. Moving on, we have Nanaka, which is another attacker and also will have to go in this. I can already tell you right now, all attackers are going in this tier right here. It's because, like I said earlier, they all can basically do each other's jobs, with the only difference being that some are AoE and some are single target, but for the most part, they're kind of similar. So if we're looking at Nanaka, she also single target damage. If the target break bonus is 200% or higher, which is going to be mostly against big enemies and bosses, because normal little enemies don't have break bonuses that high. But basically against bosses, when they're on break, you deal extra damage, which is kind of what an attacker is supposed to do anyway, that you're attacking a boss once they're broken. So you basically always have 20% increase in damage when you're playing the character as they're supposed to be played. But before you're doing that, you're going to be using a skill, which also is just very simple basic damage, but also increases crit rate. And we're going to be seeing that, oh, her passive also increases crit rate, awesome, so it's going to be having a lot of crit rate, and even crit damage with your special attack. And if we look at how those numbers go up, so you get 20% crit rate from this, another 20% crit rate from this, so you're going to be having basically almost all the time 40% extra crit rate just from Nanaka herself. Of course, you're going to have other buffers on the team, maybe buffing crit, and since she does extra crit damage, it makes it quite likely that her special attack is going to crit, which then on top also does damage dealt increase. So you see that you can stack some bonuses with crit and all those other bonuses to just deal a lot of damage once the enemy is put into the break. Support ability also increases crit. Let's see if the Ascension passives are just as good. So you get to faster Kyoko, awesome. On crit, even more stuff for critting, awesome. To get to Kyoko faster, Kyoko special attack that is. And enemy break advanced action order so she can act faster. Generally, these Ascension effects are not that crazy. I would have really liked to see more powerful Ascension effects, sadly. Most of these are just to get to Kyoko a little bit faster, but only a little bit. It doesn't actually do that much. So overall, yeah, she's a really good single target attacker. But it's still only single target really, so I mean, specifically against single target, it's going to be effective. Yeah, basically all the other single target attackers are going to be doing the same job, so it's not really that much special specifically about Nanaka is what I'm trying to say. As a character in the story, I love her a lot, but as a gameplay unit, she just does her job, right? If she's here to do her job, she does her job. That's about it. Moving on, we have then Asuka, who we also have in here, is also a single target character. You can see a lot of these are single target characters in here. What does she do? Well, we're going to be seeing that she, since I already put her in here, she's going to be quite similar to all the other single target attackers. Woo! So what does she do? Well, single target special increases her own action order. So I think we also had another character that had basically the same thing to just get more turns out. Awesome. She also increases her own damage dealt by 10% when she uses her skill. Awesome. It's not like we've seen this on other characters as well. But she has at least something, which is that every few turns, like every turn rather, she gets increased attack. And if she's on low HP, she even gets bonus defense. But this is like not a whole lot. It's like just a little. She's kind of boring, to be fair. The support ability is also a little bit of attack. It's like, okay, there's like not much here. Her skill set is really barren. I'm struggling to find the words to like talk about interesting stuff to say about her, because it just isn't. It's extremely simple, and none of it is like specifically powerful or anything. If we look at here, it's like, okay, oh, she can give herself extra speed, and she also gets a little bit more extra attack. Okay, that's some interesting stuff right there, but that's about it. So I would probably put her actually kind of lower than the other two. Maybe this is the order between the three. They're still in the same tier, in my opinion, but they're still kind of close. If it's AoE, then like Kush is way further ahead. But they're all kind of interchangeable. They're all kind of doing the same job at the end of the day. And then we have Karin. Why are you making me sad, Karin? As a character, I love Karin so much. She's one of my favorite characters in the entire game. But as like a gameplay unit, oh my god, Karin, what is wrong with you? How are you 93 speed? Why are you slow as a snail? What happened, Karin? Did you fall asleep? What? So she's a single target breaker. Here's the thing I said earlier about breakers, is that breakers need to be really fast, because breakers need to get many turns to break enemies as fast as possible. But with her being this slow, the action advance is not going to be that helpful on a special, because that's not going to happen that often. It also costs 85 MP, which is more than most of the characters. I think most have like 75 or something, or 80. Her skill is like, it does do a little bit of MP to self. I was hoping for a little bit more of an effect, but that said, the other single target breaker that we have, Seika, she has the magic system instead, which at least does more hits per like every few turns. And then the ability is a little bit of break effect, which break effect is not break gauge depletion. It's just how fast the break gauge goes up once it has been depleted on the damage multiplier. So not actually that important. The support ability is at least somewhat nice. But what else does it do? On enemy break increases speed by a little bit. So here's the thing. Also mentioned this earlier. HP or rather S speed percentage bonuses are much better if the character has higher speed base, right? Because it's 12% in this case of the base, which if it's like 120 or something is a lot. If it's 93, it's not that much. So that doesn't help. Also, increases speed after a break. What are you talking about? Are you supposed to get to break with a breaker? So what this means is that it's actually kind of terrible against bosses, because you want to break bosses as fast as possible, and you're not gaining any speed until the boss is already broken, at which point the breaker becomes useless. So you're only gaining speed at the exact moment the breaker becomes useless. The only time this wouldn't be useless is you're fighting against multiple enemies, okay? Because if you're fighting multiple enemies and one of them gets broken, then you activate the speed buff. Nice. But if you're fighting against multiple enemies, why not use one of the AoE breakers? Why not use one of the AoE breakers if you're fighting against multiple enemies? Right? That feels kind of circular. That feels kind of pointless. So, yeah, this passive is kind of bad. Maybe her Ascension passes are better. Better increase speed for 20%. I mean, that's a lot, but it's 20% off of 93, which that's not good. Increase Blade Gauge depletion, increase MP recovery rate by 20%. That's actually decent. Too bad she's not going to be able to make much use of that because she has a high MP cost for a Kyoku, and she doesn't get many turns to actually make use of that. And only 10% action auto increase. So yeah, even though her Ascension 2 is actually kind of good and her Ascension 1 as well, it's not enough to make up for the fact that her passive is useless and only becomes useful after she herself becomes useless. And in the situation where it would be useful, AoE breakers are better. It is, she just doesn't work. She just straight up doesn't work right now. I don't know what they were thinking. And the thing is, you could actually make her decent very easily if you just gave her like 110 speed instead of 93. The other single target breaker that we have, if you take a look at Seika, she has 113 speed. If Karin had that much speed, she would instantly go to either top of decent or bottom of generally great. Maybe. You still have to fix her passive, like that wouldn't put her above Seika, she'd still be below Seika, but at least she would be able to do something. But with her also being really slow, she just doesn't work. And I'm really sorry to say this. But hey, maybe on Halloween we're maybe going to see a 5-star Ashley, and a 5-star Karin as well. And a 5-star Karin might actually be really good. Huh, interesting. Hopefully that's going to happen. But yeah, that was that. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and I'll see you guys next time.